Hey, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining. It's officially 3 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. My name is Kayla Rowan. I am the Director of Energy Management at Peoples Company. I will be moderating today's webinar. We have an outstanding lineup of speakers ready to present on a variety of energy-related topics. Those topics include strategies for managing energy opportunities, challenges, and interfaces on your land, uh, basic renewables 101, Trump era policy impacts for renewables, oil and gas in transition, exploring the post-election landscape, and unlocking hidden revenue, understanding suspended funds. I'd like to first take a minute and share with you a little about Peoples Company and the services that we provide. So Peoples Company is a full service land transaction platform. Our company started as the farm management team in the trust department of a bank in Indianola, Iowa. We spun out of the bank 52 years ago, and as you can see, we've experienced some significant growth over the years. We now have 7 lines of business with a presence in all major agricultural regions. Our land brokerage and auctions team specializes in marketing and selling land, offering both traditional listings and auction services. Our land management team focuses on managing farmland sustainably, addressing environmental concerns, and maximizing the future value of the farmland. We have the largest agricultural appraisal team in the country. They prepare certified valuations by leveraging cutting edge technology and extensive real estate sales database. Our capital markets division facilitates diverse farmland investment transactions through multiple investment structures. And we also offer crop insurance to help clients protect their income and manage their farming risks. And our corporate services division provides tailored solutions for the demands of corporate clients with large and geographically diverse portfolios. To learn more about any of these services, please visit our Peoples Company webpage, or you can find us on any of the major social media platforms. A little more about our energy management services. We offer a full suite of services for both mineral owners as well as landowners who either have or are interested in having renewables on their property. So wind, solar, or battery energy storage systems are what we most commonly see. Our services include lease negotiations, contract review, GIS mapping. We also offer revenue accounting, asset sales, valuations and license appraisals, and annual tax reporting. On the mineral side, our clients have 24/7 access to their dashboard, which gives them live access to their portfolio, which includes maps, well database information, as well as revenue history and document storage. And then for our renewable clients, we also offer infrastructure evaluation, which enables us to determine whether their property is a good candidate for a renewable project. If you're interested in learning more about the energy management division, please reach out to me and I will be happy to assist you. Before we jump into presentations, please note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be available online in a few days. So if you need to hop off of the webinar for any reason or revert back to it, that'll be available online, or perhaps you want to share it with someone that you believe may find the information useful. If you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to drop them in the chat. The panel will do our best to go ahead and answer those as they come up live or during the Q&A at the end of the webinar. And I just want to note that as we put together today's webinar, we are very intentional about selecting relevant topics and speakers with varying backgrounds and industry experience. After the election in November, we've had many questions about how the administration changes may impact the energy industry. The fact is, we have an incoming president who has been very vocal about supporting the oil and gas industry, and his comments in the renewable space have not been quite as favorable. That said, he has appointed a few key cabinet members who have spent their careers focused on clean energy and environmental issues. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. The speakers have agreed to share what impacts, if any, they're expecting in their respective fields. The intent today is not in any way to get into political opinions. It's merely to have an open discussion around how they are preparing for the future in their respective capacities. So without any further delay, I want to introduce you to our first presenter. Buford Boyd Pollett is a licensed attorney in Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, and Georgia. He's also a licensed geoscientist in Texas and a proctor in maritime law. Pollett is also the Genevieve King Rogers Associate Professor of Energy Law and AIEN and AAPL Director of Energy Programs and Energy Law Journal Faculty Advisor. He brings over 20 years of domestic and international legal experience, serving his clients as senior counsel, manager, and at the director level. His energy experience includes work with Eni, the Italian National Oil Company, Wilson Offshore and Marine, McDermott, Technip, Entergy, Amoco, Texaco, Nabors, and Shell Exxon joint venture in Germany. He has a master's degree and a bachelor's degree in geology from the University of Georgia, a master's in international business management degree from Pepperdine University, and a Juris Doctorate from Loyola University Law School in New Orleans. Buford, welcome. You've already got your screen shared and are ready to go.
Good. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Good. Thank you, Kayla, for allowing me to do this. Thank you, People's Company, and I hope everyone enjoys. I'm going to try to keep it pretty short. Just because I've got slides doesn't mean I'm going to hit each one. I'm providing the slides as a reference, but I'll make sure to keep my portion of the presentation today short. I am at the University of Tulsa normally, but as of at this moment, I'm sitting about 20-30 miles from my family farm in Georgia at a public library. So even though I'm not an active farmer, I do have a farm here in Georgia. And so a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today are issues that my neighbors here in Georgia and my neighbors in Oklahoma deal with on a regular basis. So let's go ahead and share some of this information with you today. So I'm going to be talking about strategies for managing opportunities, challenges, interfaces on your land. And I'm going to hit the high level. The first bullet point, resource potential. I'm just going to show you the slides visually, the maps to highlight some of those energy potential locations. Then we're going to spend a little time going through the regulatory framework. I'm going to give you the way I see the world, which as far as regulatory and but especially when it comes to realty. And I'm going to talk shortly about the rights and obligations in energy projects at a very high level. And then I'm going to give you an example of an interaction of a particular thing you might think about on a piece of land, realty here in the US, and then we're going to have some takeaways. So this is a map that's one of the most complex maps. And again, these slides I'm providing for your reference, and People's Company can share these with you. I'll send them over to them later today. But you can see this map shows, it's very detailed in the sense it's covering everything from biomass, wind, solar, tidal potential, hydropower, geothermal. These are just to highlight the obvious. I think we can see is that the largest potential from renewable side is with solar, and as far as you can see gigawatts when it comes to potential. When it comes to geothermal, you can see the levels there. Wind, 11,000 gigawatts, and then you can see water power and biopower in respective numbers of 68 gigawatts and 62 gigawatts. So these are potential energy potentials here in the US. And what makes it even this chart or map even more complex is it shows you the transmission lines that currently exist here in the U.S. So this is a really interesting example of the overall renewable energy potential here in the U.S. You got to remember, I'm a geologist initially by training, so we try to get high early and see what the potential of certain resources is when it get a particular location. This map here shows you the geothermal potential of various locations around the U.S. Obviously, you can see the Western U.S. has the highest geothermal potential with other areas in different locations. It doesn't mean you can't have geothermal in various locations, but there's just higher levels of potential in those areas with higher temperature. Solar potential, no surprise. Typically, we think of southern part of the U.S. as well as a concentration in the Southwest as being the most likely to have the greatest energy potential from solar resources. Wind, I'm not going to walk through. There's a geologic and a geomorphic reason why the mid-continent and the coast are really. The obvious answer is the Rocky Mountains and the Gulf of Mexico. I'll keep it simple there. The interaction of the Rocky Mountains with the Gulf of Mexico makes the mid-continent a really obvious location for wind development, as well as the Great Lakes and the shores. We have that interaction between the land masses and the oceanic waters. And another thing we talk about is critical minerals. I'm not going to explain every mineral here, but just obviously you've heard a lot about minerals development needed for renewable energy, whether it's battery storage. And the largest producer of critical minerals really is China. I'm not saying you can't do it here in the US, but as of right now, China leads the world. So what do we do about these other resources like hydrogen, which people are looking at? You can see the mid-continent's a really important location for renewable green hydrogen potential, which could be a substitute for some power sources or even fuels for vehicles. And this is a chart that shows current potential. This is not so much probably a discussion for landowners, but if you have riparian rights or if you're located near water sources, that may be something that you think about. But overall, we often think about when it comes to energy, the U.S. compared to the world, you've got unconventional, which is the green. U.S. leads the world when it comes to unconventional petroleum resources, and Middle East when it comes to conventional. When I say unconventional, I mean we think fracking. Unconventional, we generally think just punching a hole in the ground and producing the crude oil. So what does this mean as far as other sources like biomass? That's something we see in Iowa and the Midwest, even around the Mississippi Delta. You can see a lot of rice fields. There's a lot of opportunity for biomass production. And you've got all this information about where energy may be produced. What does that mean as far as your real property framework? Well, one of the things I quickly want you to remember is that jurisdiction is power to exercise authority over certain activities. And I want to give you a quick example. Think about location. Think about the activity that you're doing. There's a quick example in Colorado. If you want to collect rain, you have to basically, if you want to do that, you say you're allowed under the law to collect 2 rain barrels with a combined capacity of 110 gallons. And that can be only used in that location. The reason I'm giving you this example is I'm trying to show you the mindset that I'm trying to create. Pick a location on the map, pick an activity, and what jurisdiction, whether it's federal, state, or local, has the ability to regulate that activity and what law governs. Well, a third part of that mindset is the overall interactivity between the various regulatory authorities, whether it's state, federal, local, I should say federal, state, or local. And I want to give you a quick example. If you're building a house, for example, on my family farm here in Georgia, I would probably have to deal with the county at the most. There's very little I would have to do with the state overall, but considering what I would be building, probably not much with the federals. But there was a house being built in California where they were using wings as the roof on this house. And from there, it looked like it was downplaying. In this particular house required 17 clearances from the government in a 2-year permitting process, where the Homeland Security and FAA, actually the Federal Aviation Administration, considered requiring the home builder to put X's on the roof of the house to deter pilots from calling in the crash. So this is an example of, okay, even though we're talking about building a wind farm in Iowa, what are the jurisdictional regulatory interfaces that you might have to interact with, considering where that wind farm, is it located in a wetland? Is it located in a city? You kind of have to pick a dot on the map and figure out, okay, what is the location, what is the activity, what various agencies are you interacting with, and at the same time, how does that change over time? Because some of these projects take many years. Typical oil and gas project can be, generally you might think 1 to 5 years at the, some of these onshore projects. Some of these offshore wind projects can take 10 years before you even break any ground, right? So it's a complex process of visualizing these opportunities. So one thing I want to highlight is whatever you're doing, you have to visualize the interactivity with the federal, state, and local authorities in any project that you do. And that's this ability to visualize and how you share this risk and maximize these opportunities on projects is something that's so important. So note that as we talk about changes in administration, whether you got the Biden administration now or the Trump administration coming in, this sovereignty or how this is regulated can impact not only the individual project, but the entire industry over time based on administrations. So I want to go on to something that I think is very important when it comes to, I'm going to skip a slide right quick, a few slides, because a lot of you may be thinking about, if you're dealing with governmental agencies and they want to put a transmission line across your property, we're talking about regulatory jurisdiction, that process is called eminent domain, and it will go through the condemnation process. And what happens in that process can vary from state to state, but it also may in some cases be regulated by the federal government as through a process, if you're dealing with various agencies at the federal level, of determination of whether for example, a transmission line, if it's an interstate transmission line, is it a certificate of public convenience and necessity that should be issued by a federal agency such as the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And of course, typically the government or the developer will try to negotiate and deal with you to buy the land. If the owner agrees to the offered price, the parties can avoid court altogether. However, if the owner and the government disagree, or the developer disagree in the sale price of the property, the parties will have to attend a court hearing or some type of regulatory hearing to address the contested issue of fair market value on the land. And this is something that, because in the U.S., we have a principle that under the 5th Amendment, 14th Amendment of the Constitution, you have to be paid for takings of your land. So this is an area of concern when it comes to property. As you can see in this map here, anything with a color, I'm going to keep this simple. Anything with a color is government land, whether it's federal, state, or local. Anything that's clear is private land. And you can see in the West, a lot of the land that is regulated by the BLM and very little that is in the East. So we're talking about private land. How do we develop these resources? Well, when it comes to wind, we often think about a wind lease. And I'm not going to read the whole slide because there's some complexities in the slide, but I will point out that the original wind leases were based on oil and gas leases, but these wind leases are more complex than a typical oil and gas lease. And I will tell you that a lot of these wind leases typically favor developers. However, I will point out that in Texas, some landowners have negotiated the ability to continue certain activities such as farming, ranching, oil and gas operation, recreational activities, hunting, and also royalty rights generated from the power from the wind farm. In addition, we often talk about this, but we find in various jurisdictions called the accommodation doctrine. The mineral state is, and then, by the way, on just a quick timeout, this concept of mineral state does not exist in Louisiana. In Louisiana, we use I'm a licensed attorney in Louisiana. In Louisiana, we use servitudes. You don't split the surface with the ownership. You have servitude. So this mineral estate concept applies to the common law states here in the U.S. But in the common law states, you can split the surface and the mineral estate through severance. And in that case, the mineral estate is the dominant estate, and the surface has to accommodate reasonable activities of the mineral estate to develop its resources. And one of the things we often recommend to our students and the people we're training is that whether you have a surface estate, if you're developing a wind resource or any type of surface estate resource, you often should consider executing some type of accommodation agreement. Even if you have a mineral estate, you think about executing an accommodation agreement so everybody and on with regards to the activities they're performing. I'm not going to go through the transmission procedures, but I'll point out when it comes to activities, there can be controversies, whether it's tie-in lines, whether it's transmission lines, these type of backlash from local communities. And this is an example of the wind catcher project that was going to run across the state of Oklahoma, which ultimately was canceled because of the controversy. And there's a pretty big project over time that was going to be, you can see 1.5 gigawatts of power, $2 billion project. However, it was canceled and actually ultimately downsized because that line was very costly and controversial, and a lot of landowners did not like that project. And what happens when landowners typically don't like projects, they call up their politicians, and their politicians often, and the other individuals, in this case, regulatory agencies, responded, and that project was canceled. As it says here, the company decided not to build that transmission line at its time, and they decided to use existing grid and local connections. Couple things about wind rights. I'm not going through solar easements too much, but wind rights, there's opportunities for wind flow rights. There's also in some states, I'll hit this really quickly, some states will allow you to sever wind rights, and if it's in conjunction with a wind development lease. Other states prohibit the severance of wind rights, and I can tell you that some states haven't spoken, and actually there are landowners who are severing wind rights from certain states where the legislature has not spoken ability to do so. And you have whether it's for on a wind farm or whether it's pursuant to some type of conveyance, you have to do those drafting considerations in compliance with local law if they're allowed. What else? Oh, what else to think about is wind turbines can create turbulent wind flow, and when you're downwind, the production efficiency of the downwind turbines may not be as productive, and therefore several states have enacted statutes granting easements to protect wind flow of downwind wind farms. Going forward, you might see some courts apply the concept to rule of capture and correlative rights that we've seen in oil and gas to balance the interest of upwind and downwind landowners. Again, this is an example to a point I just highlighted, that severance of wind rights remains resolved in some states. But you can see that some states are actively going forward. In fact, there's a state such as Wyoming, you'll see that states have enacted statutes prohibiting the severance of rights from the surface estate, except pursuant to a wind energy agreement. Quickly on solar, a couple things. I'll talk about residential commercial solar. I will a couple points on utility scale solar projects. Utility scale solar projects involve complicated legal concerns due to the scale of the projects as well as the parties and different types of property. However, like many large solar projects on commercial and utility scale on greenfield locations, farms, ranches, state and federal land. And just to let you know what a greenfield is, it's undeveloped realty. And as with wind farms, developing wind solar farms requires management of numerous and complex real estate matters. And here's an example of a model solar ordinance that we've seen here in Georgia. Georgia has developed a model solar ordinance to help farmers balance out the interest of developing, whether it's residential, commercial, or even utility scale solar projects in the various locations within the state. So I want to give you a quick example. Michelle, and by the way, I chose the term Michelle for mineral estate. Michelle owns 215 acres of land, hereafter termed the right to 215 acres in the state, a common law jurisdiction in the U.S. Michelle decides to sever ownership of the surface by selling the ownership of the surface while reserving the ownership of oil, gas, and other minerals. In 1995, Michelle sells by a valid conveyance the surface estate to Samantha, while Michelle reserves the mineral estate for herself and the oil and gas and other minerals. 2 years later, Michelle executes a valid oil and gas lease with early. In the same year, Samantha executes a grazing lease on 90 of the 215 acres with Angus Enterprises, a row cropping lease, 100 acres to hold grain, seeds, ink, and a hunting lease on all 215 acres of the land with Black. The hunting club leasing. In 1998, the early E&P drills 3 wells and achieves production in paying quantities in 1 well and 2 sandstone formations. Production in paying quantities continues in the oil and gas lease in 1 of the 2 sandstone formations. In 2022, the Inflation Reduction Act becomes federal law, promoting carbon capture projects, and as a result, Space Capture Company, thereafter Space EC, sees the depleted oil and gas reservoirs for long-term storage of carbon captured from coal plants. Space EC has identified the right 215 acres as ideal for Sunny Day has identified the right 250 acres as a good location for a new solar farm, and the heat is on. The geothermal company has identified the right 215 acres as a good location for their new geothermal facility. Please discuss Toombs, Space EC, Sunny Day, and the heat should execute agreements and the rights and obligations of the parties with real property interests in 215 acres. And if you think this is overly complex, actually, these are the kind of things that we are having to deal with, not just in the middle part of the state in Oklahoma, but around the country. And these are the complexities that we're talking about. I will just give you in a nutshell. The answer to this question is going to vary on the state. Some of the states like Oklahoma, Texas have stronger areas of expertise in this area, while even in Louisiana, I would say, in North Dakota and Wyoming are stronger in carbon capture as compared to some of the other states. So it varies based on jurisdiction. And that's why we would have to walk through the very exercise that I talk about. Pick a spot on the map, pick the activities that you're looking to do, figure out what is the interactivity of the various jurisdictions and the background laws to figure out what applies in that location. That's the premise of why I walked you through that exercise. So some key takeaways as a wrap up. Parties need to understand the legal authority and jurisdictional authority regulating the location of the realty and activity of the realty. Jurisdictional authorities may change during the life cycle of the project due to changes in activities or changes in law. And you got to learn how to visualize this, not just in 1 dimension, but over 4 dimensions throughout the life cycle of the project. And for landowners, these are the things I really, really want you to be able to do. The first few parts, the first takeaways are really for the lawyers, but landowners, this is what you really need to do. Communicate and execute written agreements with parties on interactions to minimize litigation and risk. And this is something I'm very passionate about. The next 2. Ensure you fully understand the economic potential of the resources, including tax credits, royalties, etc., by contracting transparency and information sharing in your leases and agreements. And this is the one I get when I'm back here on the farm in Georgia. The farmers will come by and visit, say, Buford, what do we need to do? And this is one of the first things I tell them. Require financial security prior to breaking ground and throughout the project life cycle. When I say financial security, I mean both liquid and sound financial security, because you don't want to be a landowner stuck with a energy facility or project that the company's gone bankrupt or insolvent, and you're a landowner and you're stuck with this infrastructure or a party that you haven't dealt with before. And that's my presentation, and thanks for the opportunity.
Wow, thank you so much, Buford. Every time that we talk, or if I have the opportunity to hear you present, I always, you get my wheels turning. You're one of the brightest minds in the energy law space in particular. And so this is really a treat for the attendees today to be able to hear your presentation. It looks like we have at least one question for you in the chat, and then maybe at the end of the webinar, we'll circle back and have a few more.
Sure. And let me also, I'll share my contact details in the chat. If anybody wants to reach out, has any questions, feel free to do that.
That'd be great. Thanks, Buford.
No problem.
Okay, well, we'll keep it moving. Up next is Jackson Frailey. He leads the Midwest development efforts for the new projects team at Scout Clean Energy, where he oversees early stage project development in the MISO region with 8 years of experience across a diverse range of fuel types. He brings a broad understanding of the energy landscape to his work. Jackson is going to give us a crash course on Renewables 101. Jackson, are you ready to share your screen? Hey. Did I lose you?
You got me here?
I'm sorry?
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Got the screen too?
Well, I think I'm having a little bit of a technical issue here. So if somebody else wants to chime in, if you can see his screen, my screen has gone dark for some reason. So
Jackson, I could see it, but it just went off. Now it's back.
Got it now?
Okay, well, you move forward and I'll figure out my situation here. Thanks, Jackson.
Great. Well, thanks, Kayla, for the introduction, and thank you, People's Company, for hosting us here today. It's great to be able to talk to everyone. I work on our new projects team here at Scout, so our role is really finding areas that make sense for renewable development based on 20 to 40 different factors. And then we are the first folks on the ground talking to landowners, meeting with community stakeholders, and really putting the juice into these projects to get them started. For this presentation, I really wanted to focus on a lot of real estate components in terms of what landowners need to be aware of when considering a renewable energy lease, and some of the things we look at when we are deciding where we're going to put a project. So the first question we usually face when we show up in a new community is why would anyone consider one of these projects in their community, their backyard? And the biggest and most obvious reason, right, is that we're going to pay you to host it there. So these projects serve as a really good source of diversified income that can hedge against the commodity prices that most landowners are contending with each year. I know this year it's been tough for corn and soybean prices, and a lot of folks see this as a great way to ensure their farm is getting the revenue they need to keep operations moving forward. In terms of wind projects, each one of these turbines takes up right around 1 acre of property in terms of the amount of space that will be reduced from farmable acreage each year. So they're really not taking up a ton of space on that side. Again, turbine payments are going up each year. Turbines are also getting larger. In the past, most of the turbines you'll see out there in operational plants are between 1 and 2 megawatts. The newest plants are using between 3 and 4.5 megawatt turbines, which are also taller, but you need significantly less of them moving forward. Important thing when negotiating these leases is to keep in mind that you want your lease to pay off in terms of megawatts of the turbine and not the turbine itself, so that you are being fairly compensated for the revenue being produced on your fields. Solar leases, on the other hand, take up most of the land, if not all of it. So a lot of folks that pursue these types of projects are going to be folks that are retiring from the farming community, but are looking to keep their land in the family for years to come. Or say they're very large landowners and they are signing up 300 or 400 acres of a larger 2,000 acre operation. Solar leases are now paying usually 2x or more what the local cash rent values are. Keep in mind, all of these deals are going to have prices that correlate to the agricultural value of the land in your area. So high producing row crop areas of Iowa are going to have richer deals than cattle ranching in eastern Colorado, for example. We also see a lot of folks selling ground, so we can do purchase options, things of that sort. Outright purchases up front are more rare unless the project is closer to construction and there's more certainty associated with it. I'm also going to see a lot of benefits for local communities here. Renewable energy projects are usually the largest source of tax revenue for a rural community. We usually see between $20 and $40 million over the life of the project in tax dollars that go towards county governments. So, that's based on our project size, which are usually 200 to 400 megawatts. These are going to fund schools, hospitals, roadways, etc. A lot of local sponsorship opportunities come up with the developers you'll work with. And then certain states like Indiana, for example, folks that don't participate in the project may also see property tax reductions. In Indiana, when a large tax revenue source comes into the picture, it kind of gets normalized across the group. So a lot of folks can expect to see property tax reductions in certain jurisdictions. When you're working with one of these renewable energy deals, you can expect kind of this 3 different stages for your lease according to term structure. Development terms historically were probably 3 to 4 years long in the past. However, with all of this influx of renewables going into the grid studies, we're seeing longer and longer lead times. When I say grid studies, when we want to interconnect a project to the grid, we have to submit an application with our project plans, sizes, engineering drawings, the whole lot there. We usually have to have about 50 to 75% of the land we're ultimately going to use secured before we can even apply for that study. In the past, it took about 18 months to get your results back. Then you can make the decision on whether or not the project was feasible and then move quickly to construction. Now we're seeing 4 or 5 years just to get these studies back. It is geographic dependent. Texas and ERCOT is probably the fastest market to get your studies back. SPP, your Oklahoma, Nebraska areas are the longest currently. During your development term, you won't expect to see any changes to your current land use. It's business as usual. You might see folks come out to do soil testing, raptor surveys. There's also opportunities to host what we call temporary meteorological towers. So we need to determine wind speeds. If you host something like that, you will get additional compensation. Same kind of thing applies for solar resource stations. However, those are a lot smaller and might not have quite the same size payment. During your construction term, you'll certainly experience impacts. It's very obvious that a construction project is happening. There's going to be a lot of road repairs that go in advance of even moving a lot of those trucks along and pulling in the turbine and electrical equipment. So you want to make sure that your lease is going to compensate you fairly for the farming yield reduction that you're going to experience during that year. Sometimes in the South, you can get a project built in 12 months or less. As you move toward the North, 2 to 3 years is more the norm, just because we are contending with a shorter construction season due to freeze-thaw cycles. Unlike my neurotic dog at home, operations are very low maintenance. You're not going to see a lot of equipment out there each day. Once these things are operating, it's a set and forget it type thing, especially with solar. Wind, you'll see a little more activity, especially with blade replacements that might happen every 8 to 10 years. But we'll typically just have, the standard F-150 out there, bringing in supplies for things like gearbox lubrication. With solar, there'll be occasional mowing. We can't have the grass grow above the panels and shield any of the solar resource from hitting the panels and generating electricity. Wind compensation is a much more complicated beast than solar payments during operations. There's going to be considerations for your turbine payment, the acreage payment associated with your property that's in the project, underground cabling, roads, royalties, community royalties. There'll be opportunities to host construction laydown yards, operations and maintenance buildings. And each one of these comes with their own unique payment structure. So it's really important to talk to someone who knows what they're doing when it comes to negotiation. Finding good representation is really important. With solar, it's a much simpler proposition. It's typically the acres that are going to be inside the fence line and any sort of project substation that might be hosted on your ground. We like to say, you know, if you can till it, we can probably put solar panels on it. We will avoid things like wetlands, big groves of trees. One important thing with this is to ensure that you are getting compensated for any islanded acreage. So if you do have a lake in your property, you want to make sure that you're getting paid for that if they're going to put panels around, you know, the lake or the wetland there. Again, as we talked about, the payment terms are geographic specific, and high producing agricultural land is going to result in larger renewable payments than less valuable land. Purchase options, another thing that is very common, especially with solar, far less so with wind. Reason being is just the sheer scale of a wind versus a solar project. Solar, for Scout's purposes, we're usually looking at 1,000 to 3,000 acres, whereas wind is often 15,000 to 30,000 acres. Ultimately, that will be inside the project boundary, so very hard to transact at scales that high with a purchase. Unfortunately, we almost can never put the money right up front and buy the land outright. We still need a development period of 4 to 6 years minimum to ensure that the project is going to be viable, get back those interconnection studies, make sure there's no sensitive species out there. So we still need that due diligence period. As a result, we're paying much higher than the appraised value in most cases. Expect to get a closer to market rate if you're signing a 2 or 3 year term, and a higher rate if you're signing a 6 to 8 year term, just to make up for that, period of time where you can't use your land for residential development or whatever the other use case might be for a sale option. Definitely want to make sure you're working with a developer that can offer 1031 exchanges. We all want to have good tax strategies. Those are usually going to be a bilateral type agreement to that language. So we want to be able to work with you on a 1031, and we want you to be able to work with us on a 1031 in terms of supplying documents to a financier and whatever else might come out of that transaction. You can also put in purchase options, leaseback opportunities. So let's say, the development period's coming to an end. It's been 4 years. Scout purchases the land, but we still have 3 years before we're going to build the project. We're usually looking for a ability to generate cash on that property we now own. So we're almost always looking to have the person that's historically farmed the land continue on and farm that up until 30 days before we're ready to go with construction. A couple of the legal requirements that are going to be in just about every lease you'll look at. These are some of the non-negotiables that Scout has to have in every one of our leases. Most important is the exclusivity period. We need to have the exclusive right to develop, construct, and operate the project. We can't have multiple leases sitting on top of each other here. If you sign up with us for solar, you can't then go sign out for a residential housing complex to go on the same land. Term structure, all the terms are going to be aligned in terms of operational date across all of the leases that we sign. For our Iowa project we're working on right now, we have over 275 participating landowners, and they're all going to have the same 35-year operational cycle. We can't have parts of the project getting pulled out at different times, when those leases expire. It's just not economical. Interference, there can't be any direct interference with the resource. We can't put up a 20-story building that blocks the wind from hitting a wind turbine. We can't go out and put another new building that's going to obstruct sunlight from hitting the solar panels as well. Really trying to work as a partnership. If you know you're going to go build that great big house in the middle of your property 2 years from now, we will certainly work with you to carve out exclusion areas and make sure that land is reserved for the plan and what you're hoping to do with it. Assignment is definitely a big one as well. So in the event that you sell your property and you have a lease that's halfway through the development period, that is going to transfer over to the new owner. Also, there'll be times during the development cycle where new financial entities are created to finance the project. We need to be able to kind of move this lease between different subsidiary entities at our company. Mortgage protection in the event you don't pay your mortgage and the land is seized. We have to have protections in place so that doesn't undermine the project when the bank maybe takes over the property. And then termination, you're locked into this once you sign the contract. Again, very important to have good legal representation. But you cannot have any reason to terminate outside of things like not getting paid for your development term or your operational rent. That's pretty much the only way out of one of the contracts once you sign it. Now, really, really important things for landowners to consider and to negotiate when you're going through these leases. As mentioned in the previous presentation, you want to be protected when the project reaches the end of its life cycle or in the event that it needs to be removed earlier. So you want to make sure that you have a financial security up front. That could be something like an escrow, a removal bond, a letter of credit. Almost every county is going to require decommissioning plans in advance. So we will have a plan to remove these and various financial securities that get met throughout the life cycle of the project to ensure that they're going to get taken out. With drain tile, every developer, that I've worked with is going to pay for your drainage tile. I'll say something that I always advocate for landowners is to include a 2 or 3 year assessment period on the damage that's caused to the drain tile. These cranes are going to go across the tile, especially in states like Indiana and Iowa. Let's say it's dry for 1.5 years and you can't really assess the damage because you haven't really had the event that's going to indicate where the damage is yet. It's good to have kind of a 3 year period to ensure that you can properly see what needs to be replaced. We're going to fix it and restore it to the same condition that it was when we went in there. Insurance, just about every reputable company will carry sufficient coverage, but some of the smaller shops that might not have as much development experience, you'll just want to review that and they can post their limits within their leases and show you what sort of coverage is going to be available. Crop damages is always going to be a formula based on current price. Damage, we're going to track everything with the cranes when we move across the property and be able to show exactly where we've damaged crops. So there's a very agreed upon framework there before we go in. And then your payment structured, as we talked about before, roads, acres, royalty payments, cabling, all going to have different compensation. And we're going to want to make sure that, those islanded areas receive compensation. I do see one question about renewable leases allowing for drilling islands. That is absolutely something that we consider, and it's going to be case by case based on the landowner and based on what the subsurface mineral rights owners want to do. But we can create a plan where every 30 acres or so we leave the possibility for a wellhead to go in. So we would write that in via exclusion areas. So a couple common concerns and misconceptions that we always want to talk about. These are voluntary agreements. These are not eminent domain. We are very different than a government organization or a utility company where eminent domain is used for transmission rights. We do not have that ability in the private development sector. All voluntary agreements, folks have to participate and want to participate to join. Subsurface rights, as we discussed before, these leases are not going to take up any mineral rights from the landowner. And for solar, we can absolutely put in exclusion areas for future wellheads. With wind, because the footprint is less than an acre, it becomes far less of an issue to be able to access the minerals below with current drilling technology. Hunting is absolutely a no-go during construction because we're going to have over 200 plus workers out there putting these projects together. But outside of that, it is permitted most other times. We are owner and operators here at Scout, so we have great partnerships with our landowners. We communicate if there's going to be hunting activities. Our technicians are going to go out, wearing hunting safety equipment. That being said, you also can't turn and blast a shot into a row of panels or at the spinning blades. So it is a partnership, but it is not an outright prohibition of hunting once the project is developed. Developers will cover all increases in property taxes. So once you have one of these revenue producing assets on your property is going to be worth significantly more money. And we are going to cover any of the additional property taxes attributed to that project that's gone in. For solar, very exciting opportunities that are beginning to happen. We are at Scout a member of the American Solar Grazing Association. Landscaping has become a really big technique to minimize grass mowing costs and also keep agricultural value with the land. We've actually just started the solar grazing lease and process at our solar project that we built in Central Texas earlier this year. So really exciting to see how that is becoming more and more of a use to kind of keep agricultural values prevalent for folks that don't want to fully give up background. So a lot of folks, when we show up, ask why here? Why are you trying to put the project in this area? The biggest and most important thing that we need is transmission capacity, and we need to be near a large transmission line, not the local wires that you see, but the larger lattice and H-frame style wires that you'll see out there. We can build things usually within 10 to 20 miles in the Midwest away as an absolute max. Out west, you can sometimes go a little bit further, but you need to be able to see one of these in the distance. It's about $1.8 million per mile that you have to cover to get there. So your project can quickly be uncompetitive with projects right near a line if you don't have that accessibility. Site suitability, we're looking for the same stuff that everyone else is. We want flat land with minimal wetlands, houses, roads, etc. Less constraints, the more efficient our site layout can be. And then as an owner operator, we're always looking for counties that have local support for wind and solar. We do deep dives into the local zoning ordinances. We love when there is a nice structured approach to development, especially one where there's already a project operational in the county where we can learn what's been successful, what hasn't, how can we work to improve this, and have a really good partnership with the community moving forward. The resource, sunlight, solar resource, a little more uniform than wind, which can be very localized. You can see very different wind resource profiles even within 20 miles of each other. So it's a little more nuanced with wind. Solar, you can put most places that are going to be near a transmission line. The biggest and most important consideration that you're going to have when choosing whether or not to participate in a solar or a wind project is going to be picking who you want to do business with, right? So do they have a proven track record? Have they taken projects similar to the size of the one they're talking about with you to operations? Is it going to be a community or utility scale project? We see a lot of folks not necessarily understand the difference, right? They have a solar developer knocking on their door, but they ultimately only want 40 acres. We're looking for something a lot larger, 1,000 acres plus. So when you start looking at the income profiles, you are going to make a lot more money with a larger scale project if you're a landowner of 100 acres plus. Who's going to be able to accommodate the lease language that's most important to you? Some folks might not want to create drilling islands within their solar farm. So you want to find someone who can be flexible. Can they accommodate the things that are most important to you? What are they going to do when you want to do aerial spraying? Is that written into your lease on when and how much notice you have to put in advance? And my takeaway there is bigger, and the biggest is not always better. A lot of those larger Publicly traded companies, they have a formula they want to put together. They don't want to deviate from their legal structure. A mid-sized company with a proven track record can usually be more creative and come up with ways to make the project beneficial and have the least impact on your agricultural operations. The other one is going to be, what sort of developer are you working with? Are they going to be a good long-term partner? We see a lot of developers that go out, they sign the land, and then they flip the project to a larger company that has the financing. That's not always a bad thing, but personally, I think you can have more success if you have someone who wants to be a long-term owner and operator. They're trying not to step on toes. They're creating longer relationships with your elected officials. So they're really set up to operate this project better than someone who's only here for a year or two and then is going to move on to the next great thing. And then the last and most important thing in this presentation is just make sure that you find good legal counsel. You want an attorney with experience in the renewables industry. It's going to really help you out because we spent a lot of time working with attorneys who haven't done renewable leases before, and they just don't know which terms are most important to negotiate and talk about, and it can be a really lengthy process to find something that everyone's happy with. So if you find a good lawyer, you can kind of knock these out pretty quickly, but it is a 50-year commitment, more or less. And these leases are usually going to be 30 to 50 pages. So you want to make sure you have a good review of all of that. I think that's the end for me.
Thank you so much, Jackson. I know that we have several landowners that are attending today and have pretty limited understanding of renewables, but are really curious about it and want to better understand it. So I think you did a great job of explaining how the process works in a way that's easily digestible. And thanks for covering both wind and solar there. So,
well, thanks, Kayla. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Well, and to that drilling island question, I thought that was a great question, and also some overlap with Buford's presentation talking about the accommodation doctrine, which allows, it's accommodation for mineral rights and the surface owners as well to kind of live in a harmonious world, I think is the goal anyway. So interesting question. Okay, next up, we have Anna. Anna Buongiorno leads the government and regulatory affairs for Scout Clean Energy with over 10 years of experience in project development and strategic planning for renewable energy companies. Her work focuses on advocating for bipartisan policies that support a resilient, domestic, and clean energy grid. Anna, are you ready to go?
I am. Can you see my screen?
I see you, I hear you, and I see your screen. So
perfect. Let's get ready to roll then. Thanks so much, Kayla, and to People's Company for having Jackson and myself on today. I get the fun topic, the election. I know everybody's excited to hear more about that, and hopefully this gives some preparation for those fun holiday conversations that are probably coming up as well. The main goal today is really just to talk through some of the key takeaways and impacts at the federal level that the incoming administration is going to have on renewable energy. So Jackson and I both work for Scout Clean Energy. We develop wind, solar, and storage across the country. So certainly this is kind of a key priority for us to understand and how it's going to impact our business for the next couple of years. A couple of key takeaways here at the top. I think no surprise to anyone here, but at the federal level, we have a Republican trifecta. So we're going to have a Republican president, Senate, and House. The Republicans kept the House and took the Senate, although there's going to be fairly thin margins, which can create some complications for policies being passed. And then at the state level, where we do a lot of our work too, there is continued Republican control for most of those legislative chambers and governor's offices. So that's no major change from previous years. That's how it's been for a while and likely how it'll continue to be. The big kind of legislative component that has been beneficial for renewable energy over the last couple of years is a piece of legislation called the Inflation Reduction Act. So this included many different components that have been helpful for renewable energy, along with other types of energy manufacturing in the country. Big pieces there were some tax incentives and credits that were either extended or new ones that were put in place that were created to be a bit more technology neutral across the industry that have provided some incentives for energy development. There's also been incentives in there that have created a prioritization of project development in specific locations. So there is additional value for projects that are created and built in what is called an energy community, where there has previously been coal development or fossil fuel employment, and those things have changed over time, or in areas that are low income, and a couple of other components as well. One of the big kind of talking points right now is what's going to happen to that piece of legislation. I think I've heard what's coming up from a tax legislation perspective, referred to as Taxmageddon, as the Super Bowl of tax this next year. And this is really looking at how can the Republican administration extend the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was originally passed in 2017 and is set to expire within the next year. That has a pretty hefty price tag on it. And so a lot of folks are looking at, where is this funding going to come from? Are there other things happening, other pieces of legislation or other processes in the government that can be removed or slimmed down to be able to pay for this extension? So that's a big thing that we're kind of keeping an eye on. What's going to happen with that tax cuts extension? Are components of the Inflation Reduction Act going to be used to pay for that? There's also likely going to be some new tariffs and trade restrictions. I think it's probably no surprise to anybody that was paying attention to Trump on his campaign trail that tariffs are a huge part of his campaign. We've heard anything from 10% across the board, 20% across the board, to something like 60% on everything that's coming from China. There hasn't been any solid proposals come out of the administration yet, or anything that we've seen kind of in writing, but we're certainly anticipating something on that front. That's likely going to impact energy because we do have different components that come from different countries, and we could see our supply chains disrupted because of that. Another key piece that we'll see here is likely some rollback of environmental regulations. This could be rolling back of different wetland protections or other permitting pieces that have been in place for several years now. That can kind of have mixed impacts on renewable energy development. Sometimes that makes energy development as a whole easier because there's less red flags that we have to clear, less hurdles that we have to get over. Other times it can create challenges for us. But the main thing here at the end is really just that renewable energy is going to continue to be economically competitive. And there's also a significantly increasing and growing energy demand in the country right now. And we're really going to need every energy project that we can get. So a couple of items that we're keeping an eye out on at the federal level right now. There are two processes that we're really hoping, or we're really expecting to see some changes come through. There's the Congressional Review Act and then the budget reconciliation process. The Congressional Review Act really just enables Congress to essentially rescind previous administration's regulations within a certain time window after an enactment. So for the incoming, or for the current Congress, that essentially is a look back period until August 2024. So any rules or regulations that were finalized after August of 2024 this year are subject to this Congressional Review Act. There's a couple of key components in the Inflation Reduction Act that have not been finalized or were finalized in the second half of this year. That means that the incoming administration can take a look at those, either decide to rescind them or change them in a way that could impact the renewable energy industry. The budget reconciliation process has really just started to be used more in recent years. And that's essentially a financial package that gets passed. And that's how the Inflation Reduction Act was actually passed under the Biden administration a couple of years back. So you could see changes in that same process coming through in the incoming administration. What we're hearing across the board is that there is a continued focus on an America First energy policy. Trump has had his drill baby drill slogan. We've also seen support for major energy players coming into his administration. You've got the Governor Doug Burgum from North Dakota, who's now coming in to be the energy czar. You have Chris Wright, who works in Colorado on a bunch of different energy projects, coming in to advise the administration as well. And so you can tell he's really bringing in folks that have a ton of experience in this area to focus on our domestic energy supply. I mentioned tariffs on the previous slide. This is something that has been ongoing for years now. There have been a variety of different tariffs, particularly on solar panels that are being imported from different countries, some that come through China, and then there's been some restrictions put in place on other countries as well as they started to produce these materials. We're likely going to see something like that continue or even expand, which could impact the supply chains for renewables. A lot of what that means is folks are then looking to domestically produce sources. So there are American companies that are producing some of this equipment, but they don't quite have the capacity in place to be able to provide equipment for every project that's being proposed right now. So a lot of times what happens is these projects tend to slow down as we wait for that manufacturing capacity to be able to catch up with the demand that we're anticipating here in the country. We're also thinking about what's going to happen with some of the environmental regulation agencies. So there's been a lot of talk already about reorganization at major agencies like the EPA. Those can have impacts on things like regulations that are impacting greenhouse gases and other air pollutants, which then impact how coal plants are being operated, gas plants are being operated, and how renewable projects are being viewed. So we'll likely see some shakeups there that are probably going to impact all of those different types of projects. The other kind of component that we were looking at, there was a proposed permitting reform bill that has been worked on for a long time, the Energy Permitting and Reform Act, and that actually just failed earlier this week. I had to update my presentation on Tuesday with that news, and so that was a bipartisan effort that was really focused on improving the permitting process across the board in the country. So that would have looked at streamlining some of the federal regulations that impact how permits are issued for pipelines, transmission lines, and other energy components. It's unfortunate that this bill didn't make it through because I think it had a lot of good things in there for everybody, but likely we'll see some sort of revitalizing of a permitting reform bill in the next session. I think the big question for renewables is that going to include any sort of streamlining for transmission lines? Jackson spoke a little bit earlier in his presentation about how transmission is a key component for how these projects can get built. If we don't have a transmission line near an area that we're trying to site a project, it's really challenging to then build a line to get somewhere. And the other component is if there's not actually capacity on that line to put a project in place. You know, the cost to upgrade that line to be able to get the project interconnected is so significant that's usually a non-starter for a project. The US has been behind for some time now in terms of our transmission build out across the country. And I think we've just seen kind of this rise in the protection of private property rights, which I think is important to so many people. And because of that, it's been harder and harder to site and permit these transmission lines. But without those, we're not going to be able to necessarily build the different energy sources that we need and bring those to the communities that need energy. So we're really pushing for something like that to be included in any sort of kind of second version of a permitting bill that might come in next year. I've talked a little bit about the Inflation Reduction Act and kind of the importance that holds for renewable energy development in the US right now. Ideally, a full repeal of that bill is looking unlikely right now. There has been decent support for that legislation from both Democratic and Republican districts. And the pie chart that I have here on the right is really just looking at where a lot of the investment from those tax credits in the Inflation Reduction Act has gone. And I think it's no surprise to anybody on this call that these wind, solar storage projects, most of them are going into rural Republican districts. And so the value of those investments, you know, these projects that are coming in that are worth $100, $200, $300 million are going into those economies. They're getting the tax revenue from it. They're seeing a lot of the job creation. And because of that, a lot of the Republican representatives and legislators have been supportive of maintaining this legislation. There was a letter earlier this year where about 18 of the House Republicans kind of signed on and sent that to Speaker Mike Johnson and asked for kind of protection of the Inflation Reduction Act. I know we've already heard that whatever happens next year that is an attempt to fill in that funding gap needed for the extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that I mentioned is likely going to come in a couple of different phases. They'll likely look at some of the lower hanging fruit early on, like we're pretty certain that some of the electric vehicle tax credits are going to go away and things of that nature. But I think these tax credits related to renewable energy technologies, specifically some like the investment tax credit, which for wind has really been around since the 1970s and has just kind of gotten extended over time. Those are going to be require a bit more conversation. And I think if something does change, we'll likely see some phase in of those modifications. And again, this is something that our industry is used to. It's kind of, we've always had this deadline for these tax credits going away in our line of sights in the future, and everybody's been planning for them. And Thankfully, a lot of those deadlines have been extended over time, which has provided the opportunity for more investment. But every company that is working within these credits kind of has a plan for how those are going to be phased out and what we're going to do after that. The other component that could create some sort of complication here is there's a lot of rules that are administered by the Treasury Department on how these tax credits are doled out. And what are the different guidelines that are in place for you to be able to apply for and actually receive them. Those rules, some of them are finalized, some of them are not. And as you have this major changeover in administration and ideologies, you could see some of those rules changing in a way that impacts how these credits are being utilized. What's kind of different this time around, though, so these credits in the Inflation Reduction Act in particular has really only been around for a couple of years, and so these companies and wind and solar developers have existed for some time without the type of tailwinds that we've been experiencing the last couple of years. What's different now with the prospect of those tailwinds going away is really the unprecedented increase in energy demand that the country is seeing. So this graph here at the bottom is really looking at the FERC filings for energy forecasts each year. And so this is looking at what are we forecasting the amount of energy demand is in 2029. And we've looked at what the forecast was in 2022 and then how that changed in 23 and 24. And you can see in this graph that it's actually tripled from the time of growth that it was projected in 2022 to what it is in 2024. The country hasn't seen this type of energy demand growth since the 80s. So it's been 40 plus years since we've dealt with something like this. Energy demand has kind of stagnated and really plateaued in most places across the country over the last couple of decades. We've seen some demand in energy growth, but then that's been negated by energy efficiencies, like all the new washing machines and appliances that you see in your house that use less energy. But what's really driving this crazy change in the demand growth now is, we're seeing this huge increase in data centers. I'm sure a lot of folks are dealing with data center real estate deals right now. And then the manufacturing growth that has also been spurred by the Inflation Reduction Act. So you have all of these new manufacturing facilities for batteries, solars, semiconductors that are being built in the U.S. now, so that we have this domestic supply of these components rather than importing them from other countries. And then in addition to that, we also have this wider electrification of the economy. So you have folks getting EVs, you have folks switching away from, gas furnaces and gas heating in their house. And this is all driving up the demand for electricity. Based on the energy supply that we have today, we're not going to be able to meet this demand. So I mentioned a little bit earlier, we're going to need every energy project and kind of every electron that we can get. And if not, I think there's concerns that you could see rolling blackouts, over the next couple of years. I think there's already been reports released by some of the energy security groups like the National Electric Reliability Council looking at the potential for some of those blackouts if we're trying to meet this demand. I think the other piece of this that everybody's really trying to figure out is how much of this is real. If we've got this huge explosion of data center growth, is every single data center that's being proposed going to get built? How do you know what's real and what's not? Are there going to be efficiencies that come into those data centers and other large energy users that reduce their overall energy demand over time? And that creates less of a demand for these projects to move forward. So those are all things that people are watching. The last thing I'll flag here on energy demand is that this isn't going to be equal across the country either. You see this energy demand growth starting to get concentrated in a few very specific places. I think right now most of it's being concentrated in Texas, in the Mid-Atlantic, and in the Pacific Northwest. And a lot of that's due to either availability of land or the grid infrastructure and the other components that are necessary for these data centers to get built out. And you'll see those areas have kind of the greatest demand for energy as well to be able to match to be able to bring projects on to serve this new need. So with all of these changes happening, what does that mean for renewables? The industry has been around for some time. I started in this industry prior to the previous Trump administration, and when that change happened, there was a lot of consternation around what was going to be the future of this industry. And the takeaway is that it continued to grow. It grew throughout the first Trump administration, and we would expect that same thing to happen here in the second administration. I mentioned that these last couple of years are really the first time that the industry has ever had kind of significant tailwinds. Prior to that, it's really always been a bit of an uphill battle for renewables. So this is really just kind of a return to normalcy for what most people in the renewable energy industry have been used to for most of their careers. I think the realistic things that could happen to projects, especially if you're working with a landowner or if you know somebody that has a proposed project on their property, you could see some delays in things like project financing or their equipment procurement due to some of the things I've mentioned earlier. You know, if you have these trade and tariff issues that are arising, that could delay how we're able to get the solar panels or the different electrical components that are necessary for the project. But because of that rising energy demand, we're really going to need as many of these projects as we can get. And I think there will be opportunities for these projects to be able to progress much more quickly than they have in the past if we want to be able to keep up with that growing energy demand. With some of Trump and the incoming administration's focus on, you know, America first and our energy future, there's really been a continued focus on how we secure a domestic supply for our energy grid. Renewables are one component of that. You know, we have a great supply of fossil fuels in the US, and then we also have this great supply of wind and solar and other renewable energy resources. Buford kind of showed those different resources that are available across the country, and you can really see that we have a bit of everything. If we're able to tap into each of those, that helps us ensure that energy prices in the US kind of remain stable, and that provides economic benefits for American families and businesses. On top of that, you know, this is really just an economic development opportunity that all political parties are going to be supportive of. I think there's a recognition that we need to continue to invest in this industry. Otherwise, we risk kind of falling behind relative to other countries that are also working on these types of projects. And so we see this continued focus on how we can invest and create this industry here in the US. And the final piece I'd love to just leave you guys with is that these fundamentals of these projects are strong. You know, we have the domestic supply of energy, we have some of the manufacturing components, and these are going to continue to make economic sense, even if we have changes in tax credits and supply chains. And that's all I've got.
Thank you so much, Anna. Oh man, you did a fantastic job. When we were putting this webinar together, I knew you would be the absolute perfect person to take this on. And you know, just looking at the demand and that slide that you had and seeing that increase, and then taking into account all kind of the political factors, and then, you know, even the transmission, you know, that's obviously the biggest hurdle, I think, right now in the renewable space. And you know, Buford kind of hit on that earlier. You know, there was the Biden administration, you know, tried to fast track some energy corridors across the country. I think there are 10 of them total. The one in Oklahoma fell apart this week. It was a 650-mile long corridor, and it had, I think it was about 18 miles wide. And to your point about eminent domain, it's, you know, it's not a great territory to get into. That would have been unprecedented for, I guess, for the grid build out.
Yeah.
But you know, and so it's just, it'll be really interesting because the demand is there. We've got to figure it out. And then, you know, what that looks like, you know, hopefully we can get everybody on board. I'm a big fan of utilizing, you know, oil, gas, all resources available, wind, solar, and getting there. So, and I think most people on the call here today feel the same way. So thanks for tackling that. I know it was a lot.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Great job. Yeah, you bet. Okay, next up, we have a voice from the oil and gas industry, which is Matt Autry. Matt is the president of Valor and leads the company's land and accounting teams while collaborating directly with clients to maximize the value of their mineral asset portfolios. With nearly 2 decades of oil and gas industry experience, Autry's career spans roles as a landman, a mineral rights owner, and a manager. He has held various leadership positions both in the field and in-house. Since Valor's inception in 2018, Autry has been instrumental in driving business development efforts and in the advancement of the company's proprietary mineral management software, Mineral Tech. Matt and his team prioritize a client-first approach, making regular visits nationwide to ensure client needs are met and expectations are exceeded. Matt, are you ready to roll?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that introduction, Kayla, and for having me on today with with you and Anna and Jackson and Buford. Y'all did a great job. So thanks for sharing all that information. I see a familiar face in the crowd with Blake. I know he couldn't stay away from us for too long. So glad he's listening in as well. But I will share my screen now and discuss a couple of different topics here today. One, suspended funds, and then the political environment that Anna spoke about as well. So suspended funds is it's a critical component of what the oil and gas industry is dealing with. It's something that Valor and our team focuses on a daily basis. And so you've already given my introduction, so I'm going to skip over that and jump right into what our topics are today. So, what are suspended funds? Clients, landowners, royalty owners, mineral owners, they all have an interest in these oil and gas wells, and once they go into the production state, revenue producing properties, you are due mineral revenue from oil, gas, and the other products that are produced. And so, operators have a certain amount of time to send division orders out that you should receive prior to being placed into pay status, and receiving those checks monthly, quarterly, or throughout the year, depending on the amount of interest you own in each specific property. But the oil and gas industry, while it's advancing daily, it's still a very archaic, industry. It's snail mail. Paper documents have to be signed and notarized and mailed back and filed of record. And so things go missing, things get misplaced. A lot of operators are outsourcing the division order department that set up the decks and put people into pay status. And so you might be dealing with people that are not in the country we live in today. So things get lost and you don't get put into pay status. You might be missing, you not have sent back a W-9 or a tax ID that they require. And so, if they don't get that signed document or those requested documents, they will put you into suspense until you turn that into them. They're not the best at reaching out and asking for that information after the fact. They've done their job in their mind. They've mailed that letter or emailed that division order to you, and then they're done. They move on with it. And wait, for that magical document to show back up. And so whether it's, that division order or title issues, ownership issues from the division order title opinions that the attorneys put together that have comments and requirements that may need to be cleaned up. There could be some, legality type, clauses in there that are keeping you from being paid due to the heirship and generational transfer of those assets over time. So what that means is that you get put in suspended funds. So you're not being paid, and that revenue is sitting there, and on a monthly basis, it continues to grow. And if it's not paid in a specific amount of time, you might also be owned interest. And so how do those funds and revenue fall into suspense? And so that's what I was going through there. So you got title disputes, conflicting claims, outdated information. If you move and you don't file some type of affidavit in the county or with the taxing authority, or notify the operating company, as soon as you don't cash that next check, they're going to put you into suspense and so you reach out to them. And so, it's very common. It happens to almost all of our clients at Valor. They have some type of funds with the operators that they're unaware of. So how can a mineral owner prevent suspended funds? So like I said, maintain those updated records, file all the documents that you need to, stay organized, understand where your assets are. Some people have one or two properties that they've inherited and they're in the same county, in the same state, and it's a lot easier to manage. A lot of our clients have interest in multiple states, and they have hundreds of wells, if not, thousands and tens of thousands of wells across multiple states. And so those are very hard to keep up with, even for the professionals in the oil and gas industry. They sometimes, more often than not, don't understand if they're being paid properly on every well that they own an interest in. And it just is an unknown to them until they come to a group like Valor with the mineral tech software that we put all of our clients' assets and interest into to uncover the unknown facts. And so, reviewing those statements, it's not fun to go far past the check. You want to get the check, you want to deposit it in the bank and go spend the money. But you really need to dig in deeper and look at all 50 to 100 pages of that check detail and make sure that every well that you own an interest in is with XTO or Oxy or Anadarko, whoever it might be. And you're being paid on all 50 wells every single month. And if you're not, why are you not being paid? Is it a workover, field operational issue? Or is this something that you need to personally take responsibility for and reach out to the operator to get back into pay status? And that's where Valor and our software comes into play. And so over the past 6.5 years, we've advanced our software almost weekly, growing with the industry and with what our clients need, what technology is capable of doing. AI comes into this in 2024 and helps us identify some of these, the missing revenue months, the missing statements, the missing wells. Clients are paying property taxes on interest that they've never received revenue for. And they're not, it's because they're not digging into those details and truly understanding what they're seeing. They're paying the bill. They don't want to get in trouble or lose their property. And so they write that check to the county appraisal district and it's more than what it should be. They're being taxed on a higher decimal interest or on wells that are in suspense. And so, we've created a system at Valor where, after the initial onboarding process with all of our clients, that's one of the first things we do for them. We identify wells that are producing on or through a property that they own that they're not being paid on. And we've done that for a ranch in Louisiana that's contiguous, that, they're out living life, hunting, fishing, enjoying what the fruits of their labor. And all of a sudden we uncover that there's a well that has been drilled off site, but underneath their property they've never received revenue on. And there were a couple of $1 million in suspense that they didn't know. And then we've got other clients that have 20,000 wells in 30 states. And we're finding revenue for him throughout the year. And they've been clients for multiple years and we continue to do it on a regular basis. And so there's not really any situation that's too small or too large that shouldn't be, looked into and spent some time and even just a little bit of money, because you'd be interested to see what kind of issues are out there that you're unaware of. And so in conclusion on this, it's there's the operator is cheated funds to the state. The money could be sitting with the operating company, in a revenue account that they manage. But after a specific period of time, depending on what state you're in, those operators are required to send those funds to the state. And so you can go to those state websites, Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, they've all got them, unclaimed property funds websites. Put your name in, put your family's name in, parents, relatives, siblings, LLCs, companies, trust, whatever it is that your family has started, inherited, set up for the next generation, and do those types of name searches on those sites and see what's out there. It might be a overpaid insurance bill or a rebate from AT&T, or it might be oil and gas revenue suspended funds that the operator turned over to the state. Not always the easiest to get to and get back from the state. They make you jump through quite a bit of hoops, especially when it's in a previous relative's name. And so getting that done before it gets to that point is very helpful and less time consuming to go through. And so if Kayla can share these slides with anybody that's on the on the call today, I'd be more than happy to let her do that. You can go to our website and see the different blogs and questions, Q&A, things that we've set up over the years to help answer some of these questions that everybody might be having.
Absolutely, Matt. We'll make the slides that any of the panelists are ready and willing to share. We'll make those available. This website again is being, the webinar is being recorded, so people can go back and watch it. And then if you want specific slides, if you'll just reach out to me, I'll get any information and material to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Caleb. All right. Next up, post-election landscape. And Anna did a great job talking about this regarding the energy industry that she's a part of. And it affects the oil and gas industry as much, if not more, because it's such a political topic that both parties are fighting over. Some of the post-election impact on oil and gas, themes that we're going to be looking at is, Biden, it was very climate focused. He limits our ability to drill in certain places. He limits leases and permits to be taken in certain, types of land. Buford talked about government federal lands and, the coastal shores and what those areas are allowed to do or not do. And oil and gas is in all of those areas as well. And so being able to open up the leasing efforts off the coast and on these federal lands will be key for the oil and gas industry going forward. It'll increase production for the United States, which will be, help bring costs down for oil sales and prices. The regulations could continue to limit some changes along the way as well. So, it's not going to be an immediate, change. He's not going to show up in January and things are going to be fired up on day one. He probably will open up the leasing and the permitting, but even that takes time to set up the dates that those can be auctioned and put up for auction. And as soon as you get a permit, the rigs aren't ready. Rigs have to be moved. Things have to take place to start the drilling activity, and those take time. And frac crews and equipment and everything else will delay production numbers for a few months anyway. LNG export is a huge topic of conversation. We were able to start exporting LNGs for a short period of time, and then that got shut down pretty quickly a few years ago. And so being able to do that in the near future will be key for all the gas that we produce here in the United States. Being able to get that to Europe will help the U.S. and our energy dominance over the next few years. And so we talked about the land drilling permits that he'll turn on and that offshore leasing program. All three of those will be big changes for the industry. And it'll be interesting to see what that does to prices. If you look at it from a Republican and a Democratic view, the oil industry, while it is limited in what it can do in certain areas of the country, under a Democratic leader, we typically have the highest oil prices under a Democratic leader. And then under the Republican candidates, they drill, baby, drill is the slogan they say. And we're all for drilling additional wells and growing our production, but we typically see lower prices when we're doing that. And so it's interesting to see how that works out. And again, it's not something that is going to change on day one, but in the next 6 to 18 months, it'll be interesting to see where oil prices go, what takes shape not only in the United States, but in other countries with their daily production volumes and how they counter the increased drilling in the U.S. And what being able to move LNGs outside of the U.S. to Europe and other countries, what that'll do for gas prices. It's hovering over just over $3 right now. So it'll be interesting to see what that does in the next 18 months. A few more initiatives here. Establish a national energy council. So, oversight for permitting production and less regulatory burdens going forward. Will he or will he not rescind the Inflation Reduction Act? Does he do it completely or a portion of it? What does that look like? Definitely a topic of conversation and things to focus. And then the revoke of the Quad O. Number 6 there. So that eliminate that methane emissions rule. It's a very costly regulation for operating companies that they have to go through if that does in fact stay in place. And so, a lot of these older wells, it takes a lot of money to shut those down and plug them and make them disappear. So it'll be interesting to see what they do as a Republican. Having all 3 branches and what decisions they make on 5 and 6 there. Old administration versus new, kind of went over a few of these again. Federal permitting, Biden, he's restricted that on the federal lands. Trump plans to expedite those, open it back up and get to work. Offshore oil leasing, same thing there, very limited on any new leases in federal waters. And Trump will turn those back on and we'll see more activity throughout those regions. And the climate policy, very, very renewable heavy, electric heavy with Biden. You're seeing a lot more wind and solar and electric cars with those incentives that were provided under his presidency. And Trump's going to, may or may not, again, get rid of them all. I think there definitely will be some changes that we see over his 4-year term, but he will be more focused on the oil and gas asset and the fossil fuels and horizontal drilling taking place. So opportunities for mineral owners and challenges for mineral owners. A lot more leasing activity. Not only just on federal lands, but on the ability to get cheaper products and equipment to drill the wells, easier to lease, spend that money on those lease obligations, and develop new areas on the privately owned land as well. And then the challenges are just the environmental reviews and disputes over those terms, and the increased competition as more drilling opportunities become available. So conclusion on the post-election oil and gas view. Trump's energy policies aim to prioritize fossil fuels, as we've discussed, and reduce that federal oversight. Market dynamics at the state level for renewable initiatives will help shape the energy landscape. And then mineral owners understanding federal shifts and partnerships, experts will be critical to navigating those new opportunities and challenges. So thank you all for your time, and I'd love to answer any questions anybody has.
Thank you, Matt. I know you essentially tackled 2 topics there, and you did a very nice job of it. For those of you watching and familiar with People's Company, you probably know that we are very focused on collaboration. And so that's not only true internally across divisions and across regions, but also externally when it makes sense. And so we have a strategic partnership with Valor and Mineral Tech, and we just believe that you guys have built the best system out there. And so we're really very proud to have you guys as an extension of the People's Company team, especially in our mineral management side. So thanks for participating here today, Matt. Okay, so I have been promising question and answer, but we are, I think, a little over here on time. I see some people having to log out. I'm sure people have Christmas shopping to get to. And so what I like to do, if you guys are on board, if people need to log out, we understand. Hopefully you can stick around. How about like a lightning round, 1 question each? If you guys all want to turn your cameras on, and I'll just fire 1 question at each of you if everybody's ready for that. Let's go back and just start in order, if that works. So Buford, in your presentation, you talked about China having the highest concentration of of critical minerals. And I just wanted to see if you have any thoughts around, we see that there are some lithium deposits here in the United States. Maybe you could talk about where those might be, and if you have any opinion about how those may or may not ever be explored.
Let me unmute. Can you hear me okay?
We got you.
Okay, thanks. Just to clarify, I wouldn't say they have the largest number of resources. I would say they have the largest production. If I misspoke, I apologize. In that regard, when it comes to resources, not saying the U.S. can't produce a lot. There's a lot of restrictions. You mentioned lithium specifically. I will give you a quick analogy to nickel. There's a nickel resource in the upper Midwest, and it's in Minnesota, if I remember off the top of my mind, because I just lectured on this about 3 weeks ago. But it's a nickel deposit there, and the Trump administration approved those leases being executed. There was a canoeing group, a conservation group that sued to block them under the Biden administration, and the Biden administration canceled those nickel leases, even though several $1 million have been invested. The point being, I think when it comes to things, critical minerals like lithium and others, when it comes to open mining, it's going to be a challenge in the U.S. I mean, even I've got, if you look at the chart I've got that I shared with everybody, actually, you'll see it in the PDF. Even my farm in Georgia has titanium deposits, but I can tell you I don't plan on opening up a strip mine on my farm in Georgia. At the same time, there's potential, as you mentioned, lithium from other sources. We've got brines in Arkansas, which Exxon and their counterparts have executed. Those brine leases are really interesting. But I think two areas I'd like to highlight really quickly as I wrap up, because I know it's lightning round, is produced water, something that most people in West Texas would consider a waste product. I got invited into a discussion. I think it's pretty interesting to see what's going to happen with that wastewater and what companies can do with that. I've been told that Sandridge did some initial work on that, but it was not commercial. But I think companies are looking at produced water, and what may be a waste may become a fighting source. People may actually want to own that wastewater so they can get the critical minerals like lithium. And another thing I'd point out is there's some waste piles, Superfund sites like Tar Creek that people are looking at, mine tailings. There's environmental liability there, but there may be some rare earth potential there if you go back into a Superfund site, which kind of sounds scary. But in our other mining locations, and extract some of those critical minerals from locations that are already been mined before. But critical minerals, when it comes to produced water, I think is one of the more exciting things. By the way, that legal framework has not been entirely mapped out either, so that makes it more fun for me.
Your little caveat at the end. Thanks so much. Okay, Jackson, who should we contact if a landowner is interested in leasing their ground for wind or solar purposes?
Yeah, thanks, Kayla. Scout has a great website, scoutcleanenergy.com. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll see Work with Scout and a button for landowners. And then that email will probably show up in my inbox a couple hours later, and we'll give you a call.
Excellent. And Anna, if an industry is losing some federal support, are states doing anything to step in?
Yeah, so, states can never really replace something like federal tax incentives, but there's certainly a lot that they can do to provide some other regulatory certainty for these types of projects. We've seen recently certain states like Illinois and Colorado kind of take steps to help get projects permitted a little bit more easily by setting some state guidelines around permitting. They are also different states setting different energy targets and goals that help encourage different project types to get built. And then you see some states in more progressive areas potentially taking steps to even implement things like carbon trading programs that can really further incentivize things like renewable energy generation. So it's across the board, kind of depending on the priorities of a given state, but certain ones will take steps in kind of place of that federal support.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna. And then Matt, last question. You talked about the suspended funds. Are there situations, so maybe using, well, maybe I shouldn't go that specific, but you talked about a situation in Louisiana where you were able to uncover a lot of suspended revenue. Are there situations, especially when they're large sums like that, where interest is due for the time that the funds accrued.
Yes, for sure. So there's a couple different, policies around that. Royalties have to be paid by a certain date from production, and each state's a little bit different. Typically, it's within 180 days. And if they've not contacted you within that time frame, then interest is due going forward for any unpaid royalties. And then if it's just sitting there in suspense, again, different states have different rules and regulations around how much interest is owed and what's owed, but it definitely needs to be monitored. Date of first payment versus date of first production is key. There's been a handful of lawsuits over the years with the purchasers. So you have oil purchasers and gas purchasers, and if they're being sued by royalty owners for not making these payments in a timely fashion on behalf of the operator. So it's not even the operator that is required to do this. It's also the purchaser, if that's how the agreement is made between those two organizations. And so you're seeing more and more people put the revenue distribution back on the operating company so that they have less risk in that capacity of the revenue distribution and interest payments owed.
That makes perfect sense. And I know even the reason why the funds are withheld sometimes becomes critical. Is it the landowner or the mineral owner's fault, or is it something that, it shouldn't have mattered on and the payment should have, moved forward. So all good information. I know we've gone over on time. I appreciate the people hanging in here with us. I believe this was just an absolutely great webinar. You guys did such a fantastic job, and I'm going to go ahead and tap the gavel here. Everyone have a great next week traveling, going to see your families. I hope you have a Merry Christmas and a safe holiday season. Thank you again so much. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye. Appreciate
Thanks,
it. Enjoyed it.
everyone.
Take care.
Thank you,
Merry
everyone.
Christmas.
Bye-bye.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everybody.